Schools are the largest restaurant chain in America. They're bigger than Subway, Starbucks, and McDonald's combined. They serve 7 billion meals a year to 30 million kids.
The statistics around children and metabolic dysfunction, they're just jaw-dropping.
We believe that schools are the most powerful way to get real nutrition and feed kids real health. Our children right now in America are at risk of potentially having shorter lives than their parents.
We were having conversations in the legislature on some of the work we were doing. One of my colleagues was saying adult diseases in medical school are now manifesting themselves in children.
Jesse Gabriel, California Assembly member and author of the Real Food Healthy Kids Act. Nora LaTorre, CEO of Eat Real, a national movement to transform school food. Together, they're leading the fight to remove ultra-processed food from your kids' lunch trays.
It's not just that some of these foods are unsafe, it's that they are industrially manufactured to be addictive. It kind of blew my mind to discover the extent to which chemicals and additives which are banned, not just in the European Union and in other countries that are somehow allowed in our food here in the United States.
So by essentially prohibiting certain chemical additives, you're putting downstream pressure on the supply chain.
When kids are being served food in schools, the parents aren't getting a choice. It's up to the state. We are essentially stepping into the role of the guardian, and we have a responsibility to the children.
And I do think this is an all hands on deck moment.
You can either score partisan points or you can solve a problem. We'd rather solve the problem.
Okay, Nora, Jesse, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I want to start with a startling realization that I learned from you, Nora, that schools represent the biggest restaurant chain in the United States. Never really heard it framed that way. What does that statement actually mean for the health of our children?
Schools are the largest restaurant chain in America. They're bigger than Subway, Starbucks, and McDonald's combined. They serve 7 billion meals a year to 30 million kids. So in terms of our children's health, we believe that schools are the most powerful way to get real nutrition and feed kids real health and create long-term and short-term immediate outcomes, making kids feel better and be able to perform better at school, and then long-term to improve their health trajectories. And so we think schools are the big bet to create health in our country.
Some of the statistics around children and metabolic dysfunction, prediabetes, obesity, they're just jaw-dropping. Can you give me a sense of kind of where we are, the ground conditions of our children's health right now?
So our children right now in America are at risk of potentially having shorter, less healthy, and less happy lives than their parents. And the big driver of this is actually preventable ultra-processed food-related diseases. So these are diabetes, obesity, cancer, et cetera. And so we think that, we do have a children's health crisis, and it's not just their health trajectory and these diseases that they could develop later in life, but kids are starting to develop these diseases in childhood, which we haven't seen before. So we're seeing rates of prediabetes, of diabetes, of fatty liver disease, which used to be a disease of alcoholism that is now showing up in kids, largely driven with sugary beverages, et cetera, causing fat accumulation around livers. We're seeing prediabetes. Now 1 in 3 teens is pre-diabetic. We're seeing childhood pediatric cancers rising. We're seeing diseases that used to be adult onset now showing up in our children. And then parents and teachers and community members are also seeing behavioral issues soaring, and parents and communities and families are really concerned. And so it's not only that our children are at risk of living shorter lives, but their actual health in childhood is at risk.
Yeah. I'll just add, it's interesting. Nora's exactly right on all of that. When we were having conversations in the legislature on some of the work we were doing, one of my colleagues who's a physician, Akilah Weber, was saying that things that she had learned about as adult diseases in medical school are now manifesting themselves in children, right? And it was this whole fundamental paradigm shift in terms of what they're seeing with our young people.
Yeah. And of course, schools are on the front line of this because they're serving 30 million meals a day. Is that right?
Yes, 50 to 100% of kids' nutrition. So some kids rely on school meals for breakfast, lunch, and school supper. And not just during the school year, but in summer months too.
And, what I was reading was some 67% of all calories consumed by kids are coming from these calorie-dense, ultra-processed foods that are laden with chemical additives and shelf stabilized. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So I know that this is a highly motivating issue personally for you guys, and we're going to talk about the fruits of some of your labor. But just to kind of scaffold the conversation with a little bit of biography, because we tend to have doctors and nutritionists and health experts on the show. I don't think we've ever had an assembly member on the show, so thank you for christening us in that respect. For listeners who aren't really familiar with what an assembly member might do, can you explain a little bit about what you do and what kind of influence that you can have on what kind of food our kids receive?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the easiest way to think about it is, so I serve in the state legislature for the state of California. So it's sort of, if you're familiar with Congress on the national level, it's the legislative branch for the government here in the state of California. And so we make the laws for the 40 million people that call the Golden State home. And that could be everything from things that are happening in our schools to our higher education systems. I gather a lot of your listeners are physicians, so we regulate the medical profession and all the other professions that are here in California. And basically anything that's a state law is going to go through the legislature. That's our job.
Got it.
And, it's interesting. I tell people sometimes this is not work that was on my dance card when I ran for office, but something that I've become very passionate about. And I sort of feel that it in some ways it was an accident, but has really shaped my trajectory in the legislature. And part of that was a lot of the work that we do in our offices around kids. I'm very fortunate to be the dad of three very, very energetic young boys, 10, 8, and 5. And so a lot of the work that we do, whether it's on online safety or gun violence or other things, is really focused around protecting our kids. But it was really a couple of years ago that some advocates came in and started to educate us about the issues around foods and ultra-processed foods and chemical additives. And I have to confess that I was a little bit resistant at first when my legislative director came to me and said, hey, these folks have come in and I think you should think about this issue. I said, I don't know, I'm not the healthiest eater and I don't know if this is something that makes sense for me. But she said, hey, just take a minute and read this information. And it kind of blew my mind to discover the extent to which the industry is regulating itself, to the extent to which chemicals and additives, which are banned, not just in the European Union and in other countries that we would consider our peers, but even countries, Saudi Arabia is banning chemicals from food that are somehow allowed in our food here in the United States. It blew my mind to see that we're really a global outlier in a lot of ways in terms of how far we are behind. And it kind of made me mad. I said, why do my kids deserve less protection than a kid in Saudi Arabia or South Korea or Sweden? My kids at a minimum, we'd like to think we're going to do better here in the United States and better in the state of California. But at a minimum, I want my kids to be as protected as kids in other countries.
Yeah, amen. I have 3 daughters and I feel the same way. We could have a sort of strange modern rendition of the Brady Bunch. Sort of 3 boys.
And the Brady Bunch house is somewhere between the two of us. So it's,
that's true. Yeah. That's true. So Nora, I know this has been a highly motivating issue for you. Can you give us a little bit of your background and your role at Eat Real and what the purpose of that organization is?
So actually my journey started in college as a student. And I advocated on my college campus for our food system and our college cafeteria to improve. And I worked with other students and teachers and student government, and we advocated for change, and we saw change quickly. And that's when I really saw the power of the student voice and of advocacy, and I fell in love with it. I was like, wow, when we come together and we work together to try to advocate for change, we can make change. And that's when I really became a foodie and started getting really curious about our food system, and was really inspired by the potential to create change in our food system. And then I worked at Target Corp and corporate America on global supply chains and learned about global food system. And I saw how we can make change within big companies, and how I worked to form the first sustainability committee at Target. And I saw when we got coworkers together to advocate what could happen and how we could create change. And I just really I saw the potential of creating more opportunities for people to come together to create positive change and impact in our world. And I helped build the fair trade movement after that, which is all about global food and our global food system. And I became a new mom, I have a 7-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son, almost 5. He's almost 5. And when I became a new mom, that's when I learned about how our food system is not only the biggest opportunity to create health for our planet and to create really powerful, good jobs for people, but also that it can create health for our nation. And I didn't know that our kids were on track to have shorter lifespans. And becoming a new mom, you get this fire, or a new parent, you really get motivated. And how do I create a better life, not just for my kid, but for communities? And that's when I learned about this nonprofit Eat Real that was founded by 2 top doctors, Dr. Jordan Schlane and Dr. Robert Lustig. And they saw how sick kids were getting in the doctor's office, and they said, it's the food and we need to do something. And they created the nonprofit. And when I learned about Eat Real, I thought, wow, this leverages all of my experience building movements with students, with companies, changing our food system. And this is, I think, the cause of my lifetime and our lifetime. And I wanted to get involved, and I became the CEO and a co-founder. And I said, let's go big with this. And we decided my first week as CEO, new CEO, never been a CEO, never fundraised before, never ran a nonprofit. But, we decided, let's go all in on schools as the big bet to create health for our kids. And let's go big with this. And that was back in 2019. And we've gone from working with 50,000 kids. We have a school certification program where we actually help update the school cafeterias. So back to my cafeteria work. Yeah. And then we help them make change, and we help really schools become the best restaurant in town. And we've gone from 50,000 kids, and we just right now, this school year, are reaching 1 million kids in 20 states. So we've had this rapid scaling of this movement, and it's my dream job every single day. And I get to see the delicious, I get to experience, I'm a foodie, so I get to eat the delicious school food, and I get to see the kids light up, and it's really working. And now to partner with incredible leaders like Assemblymember Gabriel to then not just do this cafeteria by cafeteria, but to then change policy, I am just so excited about the potential for this movement.
Yeah, amazing. That's such an inspirational story. I think also a lot of our listeners will get excited about the fact that actual private citizens can actually work in partnership with public servants to actually make a difference. Because I think so much of the time, many of us feel numb and slightly paralyzed in the face of the enormity of some of these problems. But you guys found a really unique and interesting partnership to draft a piece of legislation that made it through the legislature and actually got signed by the governor. So tell us what 1264 is and how that process came together, and how it serves our children.
I feel like there's a lot of well-deserved cynicism right now about government and politicians and the ability of government to make change. And I think hopefully what we're going to talk about is an example to people that you can make a difference and you can do the right thing. And, Republicans and Democrats can come together in the public interest and overcome powerful special interests and do things that are going to benefit all of us. So this was a fun one. So we started, 1264 is the culmination of, I shouldn't say it's a culmination, but it was a major step forward in work that we started a couple of years ago. So I mentioned that conversation I had with my legislative director, Al, and got very engaged. And so 3 years ago, we did a bill called the California Food Safety Act to phase out 4 harmful additives from all foods in the state of California. And this was starting, straight ingredient brands. There's really strong science around these additives. They're banned in other countries. And there's no reason they should be in food here in the state of California. It was a big fight in the legislature, but it was a very good educational process for a lot of my colleagues to start to grapple with these issues. And we got it passed and signed into law on a bipartisan basis. And we followed that up the following year with the School Food Safety Act, which was to phase out synthetic food dyes from foods that are served in our school. Again, similar experience, but this time we actually built even more momentum. We had a stronger bipartisan vote. And then so last year we said, well, let's go big. And this is the 1264, which we ended up calling the Real Food Healthy Kids Act, which is to be what we understand is the first ever bill in the world to create a statutory definition of what constitutes an ultra-processed food. So scientists have done a lot of work here, and basically what they said to us is science has taken us as far as we can. It's now time for lawmakers and regulators to step in and give us an official definition. And so that's part of what the bill did. And then the second part, most importantly, is to phase out a subset of those, the most harmful ultra-processed foods, from our schools. And this is what Nora was talking about. We're going to serve north of 1 billion school meals here in the state of California. So that's 1 billion meals a year that are going to be healthier for our kids. But we also thought that part of what we were doing here is to have impacts beyond the classroom, in the sense that, one, hopefully it will influence some decisions by manufacturers. Because if they want to continue to sell their product into this enormous market, which is schools here in California, then they're either going to have to reformulate or they're no longer going to be able to sell. So hopefully that's going to have some benefits beyond the classroom and show up in shelves in supermarkets. And also knowing that we set an example for states outside of California. So this is a bill that we worked on. We got that definition. We think it's a strong definition. And California is now on a trajectory to get that food out of our schools.
Interesting. Let me probe that a little bit more. So I want to make sure I understand it. Yeah. So by essentially prohibiting certain chemical additives or certain ultra-processed foods, you're putting like downstream pressure on the supply chain. And California has so much leverage that, Cisco or whoever's distributing here, like, needs to then source foods without those ingredients, and that's going to put pressure on food manufacturers and to actually start to produce product without those chemical additives. Is that kind of more or less the idea?
Exactly. And so, look, the most important and first goal here is to make sure that when our kids go into the cafeteria, the food that they're eating is healthy and at a minimum is not going to harm them. Right. Yeah. But that secondary benefit is the impact that we think it's going to have beyond the classroom, so that actually, if this company is going to reformulate, let's just say it's an applesauce, right? If they're going to take out a bunch of harmful additives so that they can continue to sell to schools in California, well, hopefully that's also going to, translate in terms of the applesauce that they sell in grocery stores.
Right.
And so adults are going to be eating healthier applesauce as a result.
Yeah. It's so different in that respect from some of the gasoline standards that were imposed here in California that would have that same downstream impact on that industry.
Exactly. And one of the things that I think has been very gratifying for me is to see that I think we're close to 30 states have now introduced some version of the bills that originated here in California. So, we understood that, particularly with those first couple of bills where we were banning certain additives, you weren't going to make one version of a product for California and a different version for Oklahoma. So we thought as people, sought to comply with the higher standards we had here in California, that would have benefits for folks outside of our boundaries. But we've now actually seen it's not just the products that are changing, the ideas have taken off. And we've seen really a very diverse group of states, blue states, red states, come on board and model some of their work they're doing in those states after the work we've done here in California.
Amazing. So I'm curious, did you get any significant pushback? I mean, was there a food industry lobby? Is this a completely kind of bipartisan effort, or was there any pushback inside the legislature itself, or how did that go?
We got a ton of pushback at the beginning, and it was very interesting to me. I mean, again, this is sort of an evolution. So the strongest pushback came when we did the first bill, the Food Safety Act, and we were trying to ban a certain number of these additives. And so, I mean, there was just this ferocious misinformation campaign. And it really went viral. And I kind of saw, internationally, British tabloids were saying, California is going to ban Skittles and all of these things that were just not true.
Nanny state.
But it totally took off. And what I realized in that moment, we just accepted every interview request that came in from every radio station, every TV station, every print media station to push back. And as soon as we provided a little bit of basic information, the chemicals that we're seeking, the additives we're seeking to ban are already banned in every nation in the European Union. They're banned in South Korea. They're banned in Japan. They're banned in Peru. People started to think a little bit. And then we would go and say, and actually some of the biggest food manufacturers in the US have already found ways to reformulate and not use these. So, Papa John's Pizza is no longer using this additive, or Gatorade's no longer using this additive. Then we started to change the conversation and really get people to think about some of the rhetoric that was out there. And what was crazy to me is that you had the industry coming and saying things like, well, if you ban these additives, we won't be able to make the product. I'd say, That's absolutely not true because you already make the same product in Europe. And I actually had colleagues of mine in the legislature that, traveled on delegations to countries and brought back, Skittles, for example, from France and said, look, they've banned these additives and that they still are able to have these products here.
But the red Skittles aren't as red. What are we going to do about that?
We're going to survive. We're going to survive.
So it sounds like what this bill does is that it puts a filter, a very, very strong filter on what can actually make it into the school system.
Yeah.
I assume this is a somewhat gradual ramp in. We're not banning them day one. How does that work? Yeah.
Correct. I think a filter is a beautiful way to describe it. So, we understood something this big that's going to, change in a really fundamental way what's served in our cafeterias is going to require some time. So we have built it in so that the folks at the California Department of Public Health, in coordination with experts at the University of California and others, have the time to set up the right framework. We're not going to go in and pull stuff, out of cafeterias overnight. And then it's going to give people time to phase this in. And, with all of the procurement that needs to be done by the school districts, all of the purchasing, all of the supply chain, it will phase in. But we think that we're going to start to see changes very quickly, actually. And that's the experience we had with the two bills that we previously authored. People actually came into compliance much earlier than the ultimate deadlines. And we think we're going to say the same thing here.
Yeah. So Nora, I know we're on some WhatsApp groups and other things like that. And there's a lot of interesting, there's an interesting dynamic right now around politics and health, right? Certainly at the national level. And to create sort of bedfellows around a piece of legislation is not simple. And I know that you've worked kind of across party lines and across MAHA and those people that are a little bit disenchanted with MAHA to get a sort of a groundswell of support around this. How were you able to work across multiple constituencies to find support for this issue?
Yeah, at Eat Real, we really believe that our children's health is not red versus blue, that it's red, white, and blue, that this is a cause that can bring us to the table as Americans and that we can work together. And so I personally find a lot of joy in bringing people to the table. I know that's something that you're personally passionate about. And we at Eat Real really try to work with many coalitions and organizations and rally each other around giving our kids a healthier, happier life and a safer food system. And so I think AB 1264 was an incredible example of organizations that work in all different ways and lawmakers across the aisle coming together. You asked earlier about the bipartisan collaboration at the more political level. And Assembly Member Gabriel led the charge to bring 119 lawmakers who voted yes for AB 1264. Amazing. It was unanimous in the Senate, and it was almost unanimous. One naysayer. It was 119 lawmakers raising their yes for standing up for children's health. And so we had organizations and farmers and lawmakers all coming together on this issue saying we in California are going to do what's best for our kids and protect our kids at school so they can learn and grow and thrive. And it was so energizing to me because it was a beautiful example of people working together. And it was, MAHA, non-MAHA, people that have been working in this movement for decades, that have been, one of my mentors, Miguel Villarreal, with the Farm to School movement, has been working in this for 40 years trying to champion change. And he came to the microphone and raised his voice. We had, we were talking about how we actually had, when people were giving their Me Too's and their support of the bill, we had a line, and in the line of people standing up to the mic saying, I stand up for this and I stand up for our kids. It was people, independents, Republicans, Dems, it was moms, it was farmers, it was so many incredible organizations all coming together.
This sounds like a relatively unique experience, given the atmosphere of vitriol and polarization. Yeah. I assume, was there an opportunity to raise a biodynamic glass of wine at the end of this session with your Republican colleagues?
There definitely was.
Yeah.
even maybe stuff beyond biodynamic glasses of wine. Look, Nora's exactly right. And that was very intentional. And that was something that we made a decision when we did this. I talk about often the three legs of the stool for the work we do here is bipartisan, common sense, science-based. We want it to be rooted in evidence, data, science. We want it to be something that's common sense, that will make sense to parents and, ordinary folks. But by being bipartisan is really important to us. And we were very intentional about that from the beginning. And even when we introduced this bill, I introduced it intentionally with the co-authorship of James Gallagher, who was then the Republican leader in the legislature, very conservative, from Northern California, farmer. And I introduced it also with the co-authorship of Alex Lee, my colleague, who is the chair of the Progressive Caucus. Those two folks don't find a lot of common ground. They don't vote similarly on most issues. But for us, it was this idea that, as exactly as Nora said, that protecting the health of our kids is not a partisan issue, and it shouldn't be a partisan issue, and it should be something that brings us all together. And so we had to be thoughtful about how we approached issues and how we talked about it, but we were very intentional on wanting to make it a bipartisan issue, and I think that has served us very well in the long run. And certainly, as we've had conversations with other states, I've gotten calls from progressive state lawmakers from blue states, from conservative, MAHA-aligned folks from Republican states, and we'll talk to all of them because we have the saying in our office, politics is about addition, and we want to help kids. And so we're going to, if people agree with us on the approach and on the ideas, let's find a way to work together, and that's how we're going to make real change that's actually going to make a difference for our kids.
Beautiful. Were there any compromises that you had to make along the way? Are there any kind of shortcomings to the bill that frustrated you, but you're like, no, we got to just get this done?
Yeah, we did. We made a very significant amount of amendments as we started to work through it. A lot of them I wouldn't view as compromising on our values. They're just trying to understand the ecosystem out there, different industries. I mean, what we discovered when we did this bill, I think people figured out early on that this is going to be the first standard, probably going to have impacts beyond California. So we had people from all over the country and frankly from all over the world reaching out, right? The alternative protein industry and others coming in wanting to talk to us about all of this. The one issue where we really had to have a conversation that I wish things could be a little bit different was around the implementation. I obviously would love to have a magic wand and be able to have it go into effect immediately, but for the reasons that we talked about, if you want to do it the right way, if you want it to last, if you want it to
like real compliance, not just subbing out one chemical additive for another.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And so we had a very good dialogue with our partners in the administration at the California Department of Public Health. And they said, we're going to need a little bit of time to scale this up and do it the right way. And we said, that's fair. And so that's the only piece of it that, if I had a magic wand, I would have done differently. But otherwise, I'm really proud of the definition we came up with. I think it's a really strong one. And I think it's a really good foundation to do some good work to help our kids.
Yeah. Okay, I want to zoom out a little bit because I'm curious, where we go from here. I got interested in what is the supply chain that actually puts a piece of pizza on my daughter's styrofoam plate or whatever. Maybe it's not styrofoam anymore. That was my experience as growing up in public school. There's a public school literally 100 yards from here. We might actually hear them if they get out on recess. That's where my kids went. And so to kind of unwind that supply chain a little bit. So as I understand it, schools get reimbursed for meals served. There's the federal school lunch program, right? And I think for each meal served, a school gets like $4.60 or something like that. So I think about what does that mean? For $4.60, how does my child get fed? And then by extension, 30 million meals. And if I'm a public school administrator, like Principal Tier was here up the street at Wonderland, I've got to figure out my primary goal is to educate these kids. And then, but right along with that, I've got to feed all of these kids. And that's not necessarily in their core competency. So many public schools, they will sub that out to a big operator like Aramac or something, right? So they're going to take over cafeteria operations, and then they're going to source foods from somewhere. And there's a lot of financial constraints about how they source food, right? So they go to a Cisco, and Cisco then like is warehousing food. Some of that is government procured food. Some of it is Cisco procured food from, big food product manufacturers. And of course, all along that supply chain, there is tremendous pressure to maintain margin. And of course, because of that pressure, people are always going to choose the cheapest possible food. And the cheapest possible food tends to be these shelf-stabilized, ultra-processed foods for many, many different reasons, but also to do with how our food systems are subsidized, right? So, through the Farm Bill, there are subsidies for monocrops, corn, wheat, soy, et cetera, that allow these foods to be made under their true cost of production, which then fuels this sort of supply chain. So to disrupt that whole system and structure is really, really tricky because there's operational risk, there's financial constraints. How do we kind of reimagine that food system and structure to get our kids healthier food in schools? What are some of the other ways that you guys have been brainstorming?
I love this prompt. This is like what I spend every day thinking about is how do we reimagine our food system with schools and students at the center and think big about it and think differently and quickly make change. You're right. It is complicated for all the reasons that you laid out, and real change is possible really fast. And so at Eat Real, we have this certification model where we actually assess a school cafeteria and we'll work with the school district at the whole district level. And we assess them against our 10 science-based standards that are very rigorous, that cut from everything from nutrition to sustainability. And then we help make changes with the school district, and we help them look at, and have all the data on what is the state of their school food. Where are they buying? Who are their suppliers? Who are the farmers they're sourcing for? What hidden ingredients are in there? How much sugar is in there? One of our school districts, Morgan Hill Unified, just removed 34 pounds of sugar per student per year. They found sneaky sugar. There are over 250 names for sugar hidden throughout their school food system, and they took it out. And we really help them understand what is the state of their school food and then create a food action plan and then make changes. So our schools in our Eat Real program, which are now over 1,700 schools around the country, are already making the changes that AB 1264 calls for and show that it's possible and show that you can change your supply chains. You can re-regionalize your supply chain. Capistrano in Southern California they started sourcing more locally and more organic options. They have the most beautiful food map I've seen with just all these organic suppliers and local smallholder farmers that they're sourcing from around their school. They've re-regionalized the food system. Real change is happening really fast in these schools. And so it's a really bright example of how we make change. And now we're getting these case studies throughout the whole country, and we're seeing that it's possible everywhere. Our fastest growing state right now is Oklahoma. We're working in West Virginia. We're working in, we have USDA grant to work in Georgia, Marietta, Georgia. I just had one of the most delicious school lunches of my life. In Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, as I said, Louisiana. We are in Alaska. We're growing really quickly in the state of Washington. We're showing that you can start to change the school food supply chain quickly. And so, our program takes less than 24 months, really, typically, when we look at the data. And there are these case studies and these real food heroes. There are nutrition directors in school districts all around the country who are raising their voice like our lawmakers now and are saying, we want to make change, and we want to make change hyper locally, and let's reimagine our school food system. And so our job at Eat Real is to stand next to these heroes and help them reimagine the school food. And they're doing it, and it's so powerful, and the kids are loving it. And we're hearing from teachers that their kids are focusing better and performing better. We're starting to do research on how it's improving nutrition, improving behavior, improving test scores. And so we're really seeing that it is complicated, and it is possible, and it is feasible. So it's happening.
I'll just add, I think, of course, Nora described it beautifully, but Your question is one of the first questions we had from some of my colleagues when we introduced the bill was, is this going to break the bank, right? Are we going to ask schools to do something that they can't afford,
right,
where we already have, a lot of districts that are facing financial pressures? Is this too much? And we worked very closely with a lot of the food service directors and school nutrition professionals who were great allies in all of this to make the case that not only is this feasible, in some cases it will in many cases, save districts money to switch to healthier alternatives. And remember, Nora, I'm blanking on the gentleman's name, but it was a food service director from a district in Northern California who came in and testified before the committee that they actually, by switching to procuring produce from a local farmer, I think he was giving the example, they were buying carrots from a local farmer, and it was cheaper to buy fresh organic carrots from a local farmer than it was to actually buy them through one of Cisco or whoever this national company was. So it was a real discussion point, and it was the same thing also even with some of the additives, because there were some questions, well, if you ask companies to shift to alternate formulations, is that going to increase? And what we actually found out, we collected with Environmental Working Group and others a bunch of data that in many cases for many of these harmful additives, the healthier alternatives are actually cheaper. Wow. So there's just some inertia in terms of how people have been producing. There's long-term contracts, but you can actually in many cases switch out, reformulate, get rid of a chemical that is harmful to young people, substitute it with a natural ingredient that is not, and save money.
And actually save money. You see, that sort of violates my instincts, right? Because I'm thinking like, okay, Cisco has these economies of scale because they're getting up at 6 a.m. and they're delivering not just to the school down the street, but to the hospitals, to the stadiums, to other restaurants, that they have such scale that they're able to distribute so cheaply. But I think this is like our biggest challenge. Is like, how do we, as you say, like find actually more affordable, like farm to school programs, and fund those and support those and incentivize those in order to get the right foods at the school system. And it sounds like that's something that you can do. I mean, are there budgets that can be allocated at the state level, for example, to fund more farm to school programs?
100%. And we've done that actually. And we have made California, and kudos to Governor Newsom for his leadership on this, and to our first partner. This has been a priority for her. We have invested a lot in those partnerships. We've invested also in many cases in improving the infrastructure in schools. So there's more opportunities for people to cook at schools, to learn about food, to have gardens, to do all these things. There are schools in LAUSD, in my district, that have done some really innovative things. So we have actually, we've tried to put our money where our mouth is on that one too.
I'd love to echo that. I think it's really important to give credit where credit is due. And Jennifer Siebel Newsom, our first partner in California, has been an incredible visionary in this work. They put their money where their heart is, and they invested $1 billion in school food infrastructure in California, and it is working. Like they invested in grants to nonprofits. They invested, and we were a grantee, and it actually seeded some of our work, helping us reach 500 schools across California. And so the California Department of Food and Agriculture is making a bet with these types of investments on changing our food system for schools. They invested in kitchen infrastructure and training funds. We had our Eat Really partners, our school food heroes, these nutrition directors, bring their staff to the Culinary Institute of America and do knife skills and do trainings. And they were cooking delicious food and then bringing that back to their cafeteria. So California has made an investment, and it's working. And it's really a replicable model that we're hoping that other states do more granting, that they set aside funding for school meals for all, for more investment for grants for school districts. Their schools are now building more kitchens. They're buying combi ovens. Like California is saying this is a bet, and it's working.
That's so great to hear. I remember when I went to public school as a kid, we had home ec. And over time, home ec has really been stripped out of a lot of school curriculums. But we were learning how to sew and learning how to cook, et cetera. I remember going up and visiting my kids' public school. Essentially, the food is arriving there and getting reheated. That's pretty much it.
It's called heat and serve. Yep.
Yeah, heat and serve. Yeah. And, I'm just imagining, can you fund, and perhaps this is a question for you, can you fund like industrial scale kitchens at the public school level such that you're not just getting healthier meals to kids, but you're changing kids' relationship with food? this would be huge. It sounds like that's already happening to some degree.
100%. And Nora's right. California has invested a lot in that, and we've started to do that. I think what's important for your listeners to understand, though, is that even if you don't do that, it's still possible to do what we've done in 1264 and these other bills. You can still move away from ultra-processed foods. You don't have to do a big kitchen upgrade. You don't have to have, some fancy 5-star expensive infrastructure in a public school to be able to do this. We're able to do it with what we currently have. But I guess taking a big step back, one of the things I think about a lot, someone was talking to me about the difference between the way that they maybe would approach school lunch in, say, a European country like France versus the United States, right? Where it becomes an opportunity to teach kids about nutrition. It becomes an opportunity to teach kids about the environment. It becomes an opportunity to teach them about etiquette and manners and the ability to sit down and enjoy a meal with peers. So just thinking more holistically, not just, okay, we're going to put some calories into a kid so they can go back into the classroom, but this is actually in itself an opportunity to learn and teach and shape how they'll think about their health, about wellness, about all of the things that we want young people to be thinking about as they're growing up and developing their minds.
I love that. Like, what if the cafeteria becomes one of the most powerful classrooms in our country?
Yeah.
It'll change lives. It's a huge opportunity.
That's a very inspiring image. So I'm curious, are there other new pieces of legislation that you're starting to brew
There
up?
might be. There might be. Yes.
Okay. I will not pressure you to divulge it here, but I'm glad that you're taking the next step on some of these things.
Yeah, and I would just say, one of my theories about all of this is that when you're trying to do something big, it's often not going to happen overnight. And we said, and it may sound very immodest, but when I started to learn about what was really going on here, I said there needs to be change on a systemic level. And one of the goals we set in our office is that we said we want to help change the national conversation around food and around food safety. And it's not only going to be us, it's going to be a lot of people leaning in, but we think we're fortunate to have this interesting perch here in California. And, they have this expression, as goes California, so goes the nation. And we know that we have a lot of eyeballs on us and we have gotten a lot of attention for the work that we've done. But we understood that you couldn't do all of it in one bill, in 1 year. It's too big of a challenge. There's too much at stake. And it's a process that requires educating people. And I can say this as a elder millennial parent. I feel like a lot of parents of my age, their eyes have really opened in the last couple of years to the foods that we ate growing up. We came home and opened up a box of Oreos or whatever and never thought about it. And I don't think my parents ever thought about it. But now we're thinking, and I think folks are being a lot more conscious about what is the food that they're providing to their kids. And so that's why we have had this trajectory over 3 years. And we feel like we have a special moment. And even Governor Newsom, he did a signing ceremony for 1264 to talk about the bill and the importance and the work we've done in California, and sort of alluded to there's more work to be done here. And we, he said something at the signing ceremony like, I look forward to signing another bill next year. So we're going to take him up on that invitation. Okay. And you have some stuff that we're working on.
Cool. Yeah, I know he's been involved in also some executive orders. I think it was N125 maybe, that was in 2025, addressing ultra processed foods and an examination of what are the most caustic, toxic additives, et cetera. So there seems to be a real commitment there.
Correct. And look, he gets it. The first partner, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, gets it, and they have 4 kids.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I have really found when we have been doing this work is it's the parents who get it first. Yeah. And the ones who are most engaged. And the best conversations that I have had with my colleagues, irrespective of Democrat or Republican, if they're a parent of young kids, we're connecting right away because they get it right away and they're thinking about the same things. And that has I think that is more than anything what is powering this movement is it's a lot of parents who understand we are not doing right by our kids and they deserve better and we need to make some change. Yeah.
Just a funny story aside, our family is going through some old photos right now. As my dad is getting older, so we're kind of exhuming the family history. And there's a photo of me sitting in the kitchen. I'm pretty young. I'm like maybe 12 or 13, and the cupboard door is open. And behind me, all you can see are boxes of Kraft macaroni and cheese, forever. Yeah. And so, no aspersions cast on my parents. This is just the where they grew up. This is like late 70s, early 80s. There was certainly not as much education or information available on the nature of ultra processed foods, et cetera. And I've had, just even as someone who is fairly well educated on this topic, have had to have my own awakening to like, okay, how am I going to, how am I going to make dinner tonight? How am I going to feed my children the most nutritious food? And there's an aspect of personal responsibility there that I think people are starting to wake up to. I think the trickier thing is not personal responsibility. It's all the sort of social determinants of health, right? Of all of the aspects of one's life that they don't actually have control over. Whether they have clean air, access to clean water, access to a farmer's market or a real grocery store and not just a 7-Eleven, a public park, sidewalks where you can actually walk, all of these aspects that are very much determined by policy and the work that you're doing in Sacramento. And I think people are becoming hopefully more and more informed and educated about that side of what shapes health.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I mean, I thought a lot about that when we started doing this work. I'm a big believer in personal responsibility. We make certain choices about how we raise our kids and what we feed them. And we're probably on one side of the line for some folks and on the other side of the line for the other. And I don't judge other parents who make other decisions. We're still learning. We're still growing. We're still making plenty of mistakes. And I think that there's a real important role for parents to play here. Part of what made me think about this differently, though, was two things. One, when kids are being served food in schools, the parents aren't getting a choice and the kids don't have a choice. And so it's up to the state. We are essentially stepping into the role of the guardian, and we have a responsibility to the children there. So we have to make good decisions that protect those kids. But more importantly, and I think you got at this, I think about it, is this a decision where the parents have the information they need, or are they relying on somebody else? So I think about when I go to the grocery store and I pull an ingredient off the shelf and I turn it over and it says it's got brominated vegetable oil or propylparaben in it. That doesn't mean anything to me. I don't have any training in human physiology. I'm not a scientist. I'm just like a tired dad who's trying to finish grocery shopping and get home. And so in those situations, I think the expectation is somebody's got my back. If it's a truly dangerous chemical, somebody, ideally at the federal level, has looked at it and said, you know what, this chemical's linked to cancer, so we're not going to allow it to go into our food. And that's where I think people have an expectation. It's not being nanny state. They're expecting the government to make sure that there aren't cancerous causing chemicals in the water and, toxic chemicals in their food. They can make a decision about, do I want to serve, hot dogs for dinner or do I want to serve broccoli? That's something that you said. But in terms of these additives, in terms of things that are very, require really rigorous scientific background, I think that's where people expect that someone's watching their back. And that's what also frustrated me when I learned about the GRAS loophole and some of these other things at the federal level. I was like, wait, I thought you were watching my back and you're not.
Right.
And that's what upset me about it.
Yeah. So when you refer to the GRAS loophole, for people who aren't familiar with that, these are this category of foods and additives generally recognized as safe, GRAS, GRAS. And we seem to be much more lenient here than many of our other contemporary developed nations in terms of what can actually go into our food. So is that part of the equation, actually changing this whole sort of GRAS loophole? And is that happens, I assume, at the federal level?
100%. And just for background for folks, so when they were starting to develop food policy in Washington, they came up with this idea of this GRAS, generally recognized as safe. If these are substances that human beings have been consuming for thousands of years, we're not going to require you to go through this independent, rigorous independent review by the FDA. And what happened is the way that it was drafted, there was basically a loophole where the companies can do their own homework, can grade their own homework and self-certify. And something like close to 99% of the new additives that have been introduced into our food supply are now going in through that loophole. So the companies, the chemical manufacturers or the food companies are saying this is safe, but there's no independent review by the FDA. And so that was something that was deeply concerning to me. And that's how we've had all of these harmful additives that have ended up in our food that are somehow banned from food in so many other countries around the world.
And I assume, so this is something that needs to be tackled at the federal level.
Correct.
I mean, I suppose at the agency level, but also Congress could tackle it too.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I interviewed. Are you familiar with David Chu? He's
I am.
Yeah, the city attorney for San Francisco. So I interviewed him recently.
Yeah.
This is sort of another angle on how we deal with ultra-processed foods.
Yeah.
But he, as you're probably aware of, has filed this massive civil suit against, I think, 10 or 11 of the biggest ultra-processed food companies for essentially... the suit actually has a bunch of different aspects to it, but it's essentially like providing no choice and using, subversive marketing techniques to essentially to market products that are truly actually unsafe. And this is just another way at tackling the bigger, broader problem. I wonder if are you familiar with David at all?
David's actually a former colleague of mine in the legislature. He's a wonderful guy. We have a great relationship. We've talked a little bit about the work that he's doing. I think the other aspect of it, as I understand it, with some of the work that he's doing with those lawsuits that we've also addressed in the bill, is it's not just that some of these foods are unsafe, it's that they are industrially manufactured to be addictive, to be what's called hyper-palatable. I mean, as I think my friend Scott Faber puts it, there's a reason you can't just eat one cookie and you end up eating the whole sleeve. I mean, they are specifically formulated in a way that gets at people's brain chemistry and everything else so that people become addicted to these foods. And that's a big piece that we have to look at as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think about it. Is big food having a big tobacco moment?
Right.
And I think, yes, there's a reckoning and there's an accountability that needs to happen. And that, I think, is what that lawsuit is about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, he does, I think, a very articulate job at laying out how big tobacco actually did acquire a lot of the big food companies in the mid-'80s. That's where you got RJR Nabisco. And I think Philip Morris bought Kraft and General Foods or something during that time period as well. And they applied a lot of that business intelligence and a lot of those marketing techniques. And, we probably remember Joe Camel, like the cool Camel cigarette smoker guy. Well, a lot of those kind of animated characters that got put on cereal boxes and then marketed it at, 3 feet above the floor on supermarkets, right at kids' eye level, all of those techniques. But also the notion that we're creating bioengineered products that are addictive, that hit that bliss point, that little magical combination of salts and fats and sweets that trigger a certain amount of dopamine that is our reward system for just wanting more and more and more of it. And I think we need to unpack and really understand that.
Yeah, there's a phenomenal researcher at the University of Michigan, Dr. Ashley Gerhardt, that Nora and I have both worked with, who lays this out in a really compelling way. And the parallels between big tobacco and what's going on with some of these big food manufacturers, I mean, it's profound, and I think it's also makes it easier for people to understand what's going on.
Yeah. Are you having to deal with big food lobby at the state level?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Oh, yeah. And if you look at the money and the energy behind the opposition to all this, that it's exactly who you would expect it to be. And again, these are very well-resourced companies. They have a lot of influence. They can hire the best lobbyists and lawyers and accountants and everybody else. And they were, in many cases, in there in full-throated opposition to these bills.
It felt like they were flooding Sacramento. And then flooding Washington. I mean, I think I like, you hear about it, you think it's conspiracy. We run up against it a lot, and a lot of kind of there's some sketchy tactics, and it's not conspiracy. And then you're there in the halls and you see them walk out of offices of our lawmakers, and they're flooding Washington.
Do they have any recognizable physical characteristics? No, I'm just kidding. We won't go there fully today, but it's real. And that's why I think raising more of the parent voice and having bold visionary lawmakers that are standing up for our kids is so essential, because we have to make change, and we have to stand up. So you guys are hopeful.
I am. Yeah. It's we live in a complicated world with a lot of challenges, but I have to say that working on this particular issue, getting to work with people like Nora and just the incredible constellation of advocates has left me feeling really good. And this is a special experience, because not everybody who gets involved in politics and works in politics has these kind of experiences. But to have people from across the political spectrum, people from all parts of the state, to have the nurses and the teachers and the doctors and the ranchers and the farmers all singing from the same song sheet. Everybody wants what's best for our kids. And I think we prove that the political system can still work, and you can do things that are good and meaningful and big. And that actually has left me feeling very optimistic that we can still do some more good work in this space.
Yeah.
He led this charge in 6 months. It took 6 months. So I know there was so much work and so many bills before that, and so much relationship build, and your team has been building, because he has the most rock star team and a lot of incredible moms on his team. I love Al. Also, there have been people that have been working on this for so long. It's decades in the making. And then to see it happen so quickly in 6 months, and California lawmakers coming together in such a bipartisan way, it gave me so much hope.
Yeah. I think outside of what it's actually doing to help our kids at schools, I think one of the most important aspects of 1264 is how it is reestablishing trust in the mechanisms of government. Mm-hmm. That it is possible to actually work together across the aisle, because so much of our experience is just people screaming over the chasm at each other. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there are other issues besides food that you see as these issues that can bring the Republicans and the Democrats together to work and find compromise and common ground.
Yeah, and it's interesting. First of all, I'm not at all naive or Pollyannish about this. We live in a really complicated moment, and there's a lot of stuff happening in the world that people are right to be very upset about. But I actually think as a country, we're not as divided as people think. Yeah. And in many ways, the bipartisan vote on 1264 is actually a reflection of where people are at. Like, if you look at the polling on this issue, I went and did a thing in Chicago last summer at the Wall Street Journal Food Forum, and they showed sort of a public opinion research they'd done on this. It was staggering, the support for phasing out ultra-processed foods from schools and all of these other things that we're doing among both Democrats and Republicans. So it's like, 80% of Democrats and Republicans in Washington can't even agree on what day of the week it is, and yet you have really like huge bipartisan majorities of the country in the same place. So we know that the American public agrees on it. It's then a question of, are the people at the political level going to say, I'm going to find a way to turn this into a wedge issue and, attack the other side? Or are we going to try to take this moment and do something with it that can actually help people? But that requires intentional thought. And I will tell you, for example, when we did the first bill, which was the hardest because we were educating my colleagues about this and still learning about it, we faced an interesting moment where I knew that we could take an amendment to exempt one chemical from it. So we had originally started with more additives, and we could take one out. And if we took that out, the bill would be a little smaller than we thought. But I understood that was what was be required to achieve broad bipartisan support in that moment. Mm-hmm. And I said, I think it's actually more important that this, given what we want to do long term, I talked about changing the national conversation. It's much more important to me that this big thing that California does has broad bipartisan support versus we narrowly get it through with the support of Democrats, but it feels very different. And so we made an intentional choice in that moment. And also the way that we relate to Republican colleagues and try to bring them in and talk to them about it ahead of time and, let them be part of the conversation in a fulsome way that doesn't always happen in politics. I think that has really inured to our benefit in terms of the work we want to do. So I think part of this is on elected officials. As they approach issues, you can make a choice. You can either score partisan points or you can solve a problem. Sometimes you can't do both. And in this case, we said, the issue here of our kids, we'd rather solve the problem than score some partisan points here.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're much less divided than we're led to believe. I mean, I've seen some of the Pew research on climate and guns and things that most people actually are clustered towards the middle. Correct. Around these things. There's a lot more coherence than we think there are. And I'm certainly very, very grateful that you were able to find some around food. So thank you guys so much for the work that you're doing. It's very, very meaningful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
It's joy. Yeah. It's really a joy. And it does give me so much hope.
Yeah. Well, I hope you can come back next year and tell me about the next bill.
We hopefully you'll hear about it soon. And again, I mean, we always say that one of the things we emphasize is that this is a team sport. right? And so we're very fortunate to have this perch inside the legislature in California to do some of the work, but we've had incredible teammates like Nora and so many advocates really from across the country. And so we're going to keep doing this work here, but it's awesome to see the baton get passed to lawmakers in other states. We're really hopeful that some folks in Washington, D.C. are going to pick up the baton and do some meaningful work there, because that's ultimately where the most important change is going to come from.
Yeah. Let me ask you one last question, because when you said that, because there's obviously a lot of headlines that come out of HHS, but real systemic change that's actually happening at the legislative level. Is there anything on the floor of the Congress? I mean, I know that there were some bills that actually predate MAHA. For example, I think Senator Sanders had a Childhood Diabetes Act that I think John Hickenlooper, and there was a couple other co-sponsors on that. And then Corey had something around school food, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure those have gotten a tremendous amount of traction. Are those the core pieces of legislation that you see that are actually on the Senate floor? Or are there other ones? Do you see any hope that we're actually going to see actual real legislative action versus maybe some of the slightly more performative stuff coming out of HHS?
I'm hopeful that this year there'll be some exciting legislation that we can rally around. Mm-hmm. And I do think that my urge and my dream is that lawmakers across the aisle will work together in this kind of co-sponsorship way at the national level. I don't think there's more gridlock at the national level, truly. So I think California is showing that lawmakers across the aisle can co-sponsor and collaborate together to bring legislation forward is critical. So I'm hoping that with some of the exciting new legislation that is on children's health that does have this cross the aisle momentum, that it will start. But
you guys got to go get in front of a hearing.
We actually were in Washington together not that long ago. Yeah. I'll sound one note of caution though. Yeah. There are some folks in industry who are seeking to undermine the work that's been done at the state level, particularly in California, by trying to get some federal preemption snuck into different legislative vehicles at the national level to undo some of the work we've done, because they see that the energy right now is happening in the state. So I think that's something we have to be on guard for, and particularly folks who care about this issue to be good consumers of information and understand that I assume whenever the industry does it, they're going to pitch it as something that's good for kids and good for public health. But people need to be really
They're
thoughtful.
making moves to push back.
They're making moves to push back. Yeah. So we need to be, that's something we need to be eyes wide open about. The flip side is I'm hoping that there are policymakers at the national level that are going to discover what we have discovered, which is it's such a satisfying issue to work on. You can help a lot of people. You're just going to get nothing but love from your constituents. You might have a lobbyist or two that's angry at you, but I go to Little League. I have moms there that I know are of different political party than I am, and they are just so grateful. They may be mad at me about some other votes that I took, but they're really thankful for the work that we're doing to protect their kids. And so this is one of those things that I hope that there are some folks at the national level that will say, hey, look what they did in California. They got progressives and conservative Republicans together, and they made a real difference. And it would be awesome if we could do that in Washington, D.C. too.
Yeah.
And other states are starting to do it. So states can do, like we were seeing other states start to take action like this. This is starting here, and it's now starting in so many places. And we're doing it at the grassroots level at Eat Real with schools, and parents can get their schools involved. They can go to eatreal.org/parents, and we have a template for them to reach out and thank their school district for caring about feeding their kids delicious food, and then offer to introduce them to our nonprofit so we can help more. And then having states start to take action. We're seeing some really creative energy in states trying to make investments in the power of school meal. And then to see more collaboration at the national level would be huge.
Yeah.
And I do think this is an all hands on deck moment. We need everybody's help. We need everybody rowing in the boat together on this and trying to really make change. And so I hope people will join the conversation, and they can follow Assemblymember on Instagram. I'm always checking out what his team is doing and what their updates are. We have eatreal.org and Eat Real Certified on Instagram. Like, I hope that this is, we can engage in the conversation with your community, and that they'll help us really row forward.
Yeah, well, put me in the boat. I've been on the rowing machine.
Yes,
I got a lot of stamina.
You look like you've been on the rowing machine.
I'm on the rowing machine. I'm good. Put me in. Good. Thanks, guys. It's been really inspiring. Really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. For more of my weekly musings, along with ad-free episodes and live stream conversations, head over to my Substack at jeffkrasno.substack.com. I also want to let you know about our course platform over on Commune, which contains over 3,000 lessons and practices from the world's leading integrative medicine doctors, health experts, and yoga, fitness, and mindfulness teachers. It's a living library for holistic well-being, and you can try it for free for 14 days at onecommune.com/try commune. As a reminder, the audio version of my new book, Good Stress, is available on Audible, and you can listen to it for free as part of your premium Spotify membership. And if you prefer the old school analog option, well, you can pick up a dusty old scroll at goodstress.com and get over $900 worth of bonus courses from some of my biggest influences, including Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Zach Bush, and Dr. Gabor Mate. As always, feel free to reach out to me with comments, questions, or criticism of the constructive variety at jeffk@onecommune.com. Okay, that's all from the Commune for today. My name is Jeff Krasno, and I am here for you.